Okay, class, this week we worked on a lot of angle vocabulary. This is just going to be a recap on the vocab. We did more with it. We're going to go about it. We're going to talk about linear pairs, vertical angles, adjacent angles, and then complementary and supplementary. We'll start with adjacent angles. Our definition for adjacent angles are two angles that have a common vertex, a common point, and share the same side, and they have no common interior points. We can sort of see that here in our picture. ABC and CBD are supposed to be adjacent. ABC is one angle. CBD is the other angle. Notice that they are sharing this side here, the side B to C, and they intersect only at point B. They have only one point here that they have as the vertex. B is the vertex of both angles. Adjacent, just as a reminder, means next to. We gave the example in class, like my room is adjacent to Mr. White's room because they share one wall here. This box is adjacent to this box here. These boxes are adjacent. These boxes are adjacent. These boxes are adjacent because they're sharing one wall, and that is in common with a common point here. These diagonal boxes are not considered adjacent. We had a quick sentence here for this definition. We were focusing on the fact that it was two angles. They have a common vertex and side. There are no common interior points. That was a weird sort of statement there. What we simplified to that too is we sort of talked about it as angles, two angles that share a wall, share a point, the vertex. We put in that parentheses, vertex, and wall. And they don't overlap. And the angles don't overlap. Notice that none of the orange here is overlapping with the blue. If I wanted to talk about ABD as an angle, the blue and the yellow are overlapping. The yellow would be overlapping the blue. The yellow angle would also be overlapping the orange angle. The entire orange angle is inside of the yellow. The entire blue angle is inside of the yellow. That's what we mean by overlap. But our orange and blue do not overlap. They are next to each other. They are adjacent to each other. From adjacent angles, we then talked about linear pairs. Our linear pairs are just adjacent angles, and they'll make a straight line. And they will they'll add up to 180 degrees. Here we see angle 1 and angle 2 are making a flat straight line here. So their angles have to together make 180 degrees. So we might find through measurement that this angle is 45 degrees and this angle is 135 degrees. You'd see that 135 plus 45 equals 180. Angle 1, 135 degrees, and angle 2, 45 degrees, are going to make a straight line, which is 180 degrees. Our simple sentence for a reminder for us was just a pair of angles, pair of adjacent angles. That make a line. Then we talked about vertical angles. Vertical angles have two non-adjacent angles formed by two intersecting lines. Our vertical angles are congruent. Remember, congruent just means equal. We get a pair, two different pairs of vertical angles by our lines intersecting. Here we see that 2 and 4 are considered vertical angles, and angle 1 and angle 3 are considered vertical angles. We can mark them as being congruent, being equal, by using a number of tick marks. I'm going to give the 2 one arc across it. I'm going to give the angle 4 one arc across it. Those single arcs mean these two angles are the same size. Angle 3 and angle 1 are across from each other. I'm going to give them 2 arcs, and that means that our 2 angles there are congruent as well. Angle 1 here is congruent to angle 3. To give you a visual reminder of our vertical angles, I did give this visual here where we drew a tall X, and the top of it stood for vertical, because it looks like a V. We got vertical, and the bottom of it was going to be our angles. The bottom of it was going to be our angles. If you connect the A and V in your vertical angle name, you'll see a pair of vertical angles off the bat. Now, we did also come up with a sentence for this. Somebody described, one of our students, my student, described our pair of angles, our vertical angles, as bow ties. Should you think about your bow ties when you're putting on a tux or tying a bow in your hair? You get two things that are the same on both sides. Your bow tie is not set up well if the two are not matching. The two sides of the bow tie are the same. Last two things, we had complementary and supplementary angles. Complementary angles were two angles with measures that sum up to 90 degrees. We could have two pictures, and you did do two pictures this week. Say we got one here, we might say that is 60 degrees. We might have another angle over here, a little bit smaller. Say it's 30 degrees. These two angles would be considered complementary because they would add up to make 90 degrees. Adding this small comment, they do not need to be adjacent. Our complementary angles do not need to be adjacent. Our supplementary angles, we're going to be two angles with measures that sum up to 180 degrees. Drawing a small picture here, you might have an angle like that. You might have a separate physical angle somewhere else. The first one might be 135 degrees, the second one might be 45 degrees. They do not physically have to be paired to each other to be supplementary. They do not need to be adjacent. But there is a small comment. We're going to put one other fact here. Linear pairs from the other side of this page, are supplementary. They are supplementary angles. Not all supplementary angles are linear pairs. And if we're struggling to remember which measurement goes with which word, I gave one other thing. This is one way I thought about it when I was first learning the words complementary and supplementary. Complementary, I thought about the letter C. And what were my thoughts about the letter C? Well, my thoughts about the letter C were that it looks like half of the letter S. The S for supplementary. If I could remember the words complementary and supplementary, and I could remember the numbers 90 and 180, I could remember that the supplementary angle was, or the complement, I could remember the complementary angle was half of the supplementary. I could remember that 90 is half of 180. Our complementary is 90 because it's half of our supplementary, the S, half of 180. Those were the key vocab terms from this week.